Pyongyang's latest launch overshadowing the upcoming G20 summit and key bilateral meetings scheduled on the sidelines. For more on that and President Xi's visit to Russia, let's get some insight from Dmitry Babich live in Moscow. He's a journalist and political analyst with Sputnik International. Dmitry, first I want to begin with China's plan for diffusing the crisis with DPRK. Really nothing new here. China for a long time now has been pushing this two-pronged approach, calling on Pyongyang to declare a moratorium on nuclear and missile tests while the United States and the Republic of Korea stop their large-scale military exercises. So Russia now supports this plan. So does this proposal actually have a chance here?
Well, I think this proposal must have a chance if we want to see some kind of peaceful settlement, at least for the time being, on the Korean Peninsula, because the only alternative is just bilateral escalation. And if you look at the Russian position, I think Russia and China have been seen eye to eye on the situation in the North Korea for a very simple reason. We face the same challenges there. Russia has very little sympathy for the regime in North Korea, just like China, because it's a very different regime from the ones that we have in Beijing and Moscow. Of course, we have much more liberal regimes. You know, Russia and China have chosen openness to the outside world. Pyongyang chose the way of isolation or self-isolation. But certainly, all of that doesn't mean that Russia and China support the deployment of American THAAD missiles, you know, so-called terminal high altitude air defense units, which will put in danger the very limited nuclear capability of China and a somewhat bigger Russian nuclear deterrent on our territories. You know, look at the map. The American anti-missiles will be right next to our territories, basically controlling or aiming to control
Dmitry,
the nuclear capabilities that we have.
Let me interrupt you because I've got lots of questions to ask you. China has always called for dialogue and diplomacy when it comes to challenges and crisis around the world. But what about the Russian military intervention in the Syrian civil war? Very different approaches to that conflict from Beijing and Moscow. Is that a point of contention between these two nations?
Absolutely not. If you look at the way the events developed in Syria, you will see that actually Russia and China see eye to eye on Syria too. Just look at the statements, the recent statements that China made. China considers the president, the government of President Assad, the legitimate government of Syria. And that is the main point where Russia and China agree. What happened in Syria, if you look at the sequence of events, you have support from outside, from the West, from the United States, from the European Union, from Saudi Arabia. You have support for an armed insurgency inside Syria. You have outside powers trying to do the regime change in Syria. So in this situation, Russia tried to abstain from the fighting for 3 years. Russia only intervened in September 2015 on a legitimate basis, on an invitation from the Syrian government, only after the United States and their so-called coalition partners had been bombing Syria for 11 months illegally. Right after Russia intervened, the so-called Islamic State started to lose momentum in Syria. Now the Islamic State is shrinking only after Russia intervened. Before that, for the 11 months that the United States had been bombing Syria, the Islamic State was only expanding. So Russia and China agree on Syria almost 100%.
Almost, but I think their approaches are still different because the Chinese believe in negotiation, diplomacy, and a political solution. Let me move on and talk about the G20 summit. Trump and Putin will sit down for their first official bilateral meeting. What will you be looking for, and what does each leader want to hear from the other?
Well, I think that certainly Russia and China will see eye to eye on Syria during the G20 meeting also, because Russia is for the negotiated solution in Syria, we have been mediating the talks between the Syrian government and the Syrian opposition in Astana and in Moscow for many years now, something the United States had never done. The United States just broke relations with Syria and wanted the so-called Free Syrian Army to take power in Syria. That makes the United States position very different from the position of China and Russia. So Syria will be discussed at the G20, and Russia and China will see eye to eye on that. I think Russia and China will also see eye to eye on the situation in the South China Sea, where Russia basically has no objection to China pursuing its legitimate interests in the legitimate areas which are under its control according to international treaties.
All right.
I think also at the G20, economy will be discussed, and Russia and China will definitely support the project of the New Silk Road, which is a very good alternative to the so-called integration projects from the United States, because thanks to the New Silk Road, products from China will be taken to Europe via the Russian territory. You know, right now it takes about 45 to 60 days for the Chinese products to reach the European market.
All right.
Now with the New Silk Road going through Russia, it will take them from 5 to 10 days. This is a very different approach from the Western countries, where you see discord and where you see currently a sort of a fight between Chancellor Merkel
we have
and
to leave
President
it there,
Trump.
Sir.
Yes, so
thank you so much, Dmitry Babich, with the Russian perspective in all this. Important to point that out.